Mother Bear collapses in front of the house. What this baby did put everyone in tears. Let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to subscribe if you're new to our channel. The sun was setting over the dense pine forest that surrounded the Harper family's wooden cabin. Emma and Daniel Harper had moved to this remote location 3 years ago, seeking peace after the busy city life. Their 18-month-old daughter Lily had known nothing but the quiet wilderness her entire life. That evening was like any other. Emma prepared dinner while Daniel chopped firewood on the porch. Little Lily played on her colorful mat near the large living room window, babbling happily to her stuffed animals. The family radio played soft music, mixing with the crackling sounds from their stone fireplace. "Dinner's almost ready," Emma called out, stirring a pot of hearty stew. She glanced at Lily, who had suddenly gone quiet. The toddler was now standing at the window, her tiny hands pressed against the glass, eyes wide with wonder. Emma walked over, curious about what had captured her daughter's attention. Her heart nearly stopped. There, not 20 feet from their porch, a massive brown bear was stumbling into their yard. The creature's movements were unsteady, almost drunk-like. Its massive head hung low, swaying with each labored step. "Daniel," Emma's voice came out as a terrified whisper. "Daniel, get inside now." Daniel turned, saw the bear, and dropped his axe. He backed slowly toward the door, never taking his eyes off the animal. The bear, easily 7 feet tall when standing, took a few more wobbling steps forward, then, as if all strength had abandoned its massive body, collapsed with a heavy thud directly in front of their porch steps. Emma clutched Lily to her chest, backing away from the window. Daniel rushed inside, locking the door behind him. "Is it dead?" Emma whispered, peering through the window. "I don't know," Daniel replied, reaching for the hunting rifle they kept mounted above the fireplace, "but it's not moving." Lily squirmed in her mother's arms, reaching toward the window and making urgent sounds. "Bear. Bear," she said, one of the few words in her limited vocabulary, thanks to her picture books. The family watched, frozen in place, as the massive creature lay motionless except for the shallow rise and fall of its chest. It was still alive, but barely. "Something's wrong with it," Daniel observed. "It's not acting aggressive, it almost seems desperate." As they watched, uncertain what to do, Lily began to cry and struggle more forcefully in Emma's arms. Her little hands reached toward the window, toward the fallen bear. "Shoo, Lily, it's okay," Emma soothed, but Lily's cries grew more insistent. Then, in a moment that would forever be etched in their memories, Lily slipped from her mother's grasp. Before either parent could react, the toddler had pushed open the slightly ajar door and toddled out onto the porch. "Lily!" Emma screamed, lunging forward. Daniel was already moving, rifle abandoned against the wall, but what happened next stopped them both in their tracks. Instead of showing fear, little Lily approached the massive fallen beast with the innocent curiosity only a child could possess. The bear's eyes, pained and exhausted, followed the tiny human approaching. There was no aggression, no threat, only what appeared to be a profound weariness. Daniel stood at the edge of the porch, ready to snatch his daughter away at the first sign of danger. Emma's hands covered her mouth, her heart pounding so loudly she was sure everyone could hear it. Lily reached the bear and, with the gentleness that sometimes only children understand, placed her small hand on the animal's massive head. The bear closed its eyes, a soft rumbling sound emerging from its throat, not a growl, but almost a sigh of relief. "Daniel," Emma whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "Look at its side." Now that they were close, they could see what they hadn't noticed before: dark, matted fur on the bear's flank, stained with what appeared to be dried blood. The animal was injured severely. Daniel slowly approached, gently picking up Lily. But instead of crying at being separated from her new friend, Lily simply patted her father's cheek and pointed at the bear. "Hurt," she said, another word from her books. "Hurt." Something in that simple observation broke through their fear. This wasn't a predator threatening their home, this was a wounded creature that had, for some inexplicable reason, sought out humans in its moment of greatest vulnerability. "I'm calling Dr. Reyes," Emma said suddenly, referring to the local veterinarian who occasionally helped with wildlife emergencies. "And the ranger station." As Emma made the calls, Daniel sat on the porch steps with Lily in his lap, maintaining a safe but close distance from the bear. The massive animal's eyes occasionally opened to look at them, then drifted closed again. The bear's a female, Daniel realized aloud, noticing the shape of the creature's head. "I wonder why she came here of all places." Lily leaned forward in her father's arms, pointing again. "Baby," she said clearly. "Baby." Daniel looked at his daughter in confusion, then followed her pointing finger. What he saw next brought tears to his eyes. From beneath the fallen bear's body, barely visible, a tiny paw extended out. The mother bear wasn't alone. The realization struck Daniel like lightning. "Emma," he called urgently. "She has a cub. The bear has a baby." Emma rushed outside, phone still pressed to her ear. "The ranger says to stay back," she warned. "The mother could become aggressive if she thinks we're threatening her cub." But the mother bear made no move to rise. Her breathing had become more labored, her massive body trembling with each inhale. The cub beneath her whimpered, a sound so pitiful it pierced straight through to Emma's heart. "She's dying," Daniel whispered, his voice breaking. "She brought her baby here, but why?" Lily squirmed in her father's arms again, reaching toward the fallen bear with such determination that Daniel had to tighten his grip. "Baby," Lily repeated, more insistently this time. "Help baby." The simplicity of a child's understanding sometimes held more wisdom than adult fears. Emma and Daniel exchanged glances, a silent conversation passing between them. This mother had come to them, had specifically sought out humans in her final moments. "But why?" "Dr. Reyes says she'll be here in 15 minutes, Emma said, her voice shaking. "Emma said the rangers are 30 minutes out." "I don't know if she has that long," Daniel responded, watching the bear's increasingly shallow breathing. Lily began to cry softly, not the tantrum of a toddler denied something, but the heartbroken weeping of someone witnessing suffering she couldn't understand. Her little body shook with sobs, and she kept reaching toward the bear, repeating, "Help baby, help mama." Her innocent compassion broke through their paralysis. Emma knelt beside her husband and daughter. "We need to do something. That cub will die too if we just wait." The mother bear's eyes opened again, fixing on the family. In that gaze was something that transcended the divide between human and animal, a plea, an understanding, a last desperate hope. Daniel gently set Lily down next to Emma. "Keep her here," he instructed, then slowly, cautiously approached the fallen bear. The massive creature watched him come but made no threatening movements. Up close, Daniel could see how thin she was beneath her thick fur, how infection had spread from a deep wound in her side. She had been dying for days, he realized, yet had somehow found the strength to reach their cabin. The small cub, no more than a few months old, continued to whimper beneath its mother. Daniel could see now that the mother bear had positioned herself to shield her baby with her body, even as her strength failed. "I'm going to help your baby," Daniel whispered to the bear, unsure if the words meant anything to the dying animal but feeling compelled to speak them anyway. "I promise." He reached carefully toward the cub. The mother bear's eyes followed his movement, but she made no attempt to stop him. With gentle hands, Daniel lifted the tiny cub from beneath its mother. The baby bear squirmed weakly in his grasp, its small body dirty and dangerously thin. As Daniel backed away with the cub, the mother bear exhaled deeply. A sound almost like a sigh of relief escaped her. Her massive head rested more heavily on the ground. Her mission accomplished, she had delivered her child to safety. Emma came forward with a soft blanket, wrapping it around the trembling cub. Lily reached out, her small fingers gently touching the cub's head. "Baby bear," she whispered through her tears. "Poor baby bear." The mother bear watched, her eyes never leaving her cub. Daniel knelt beside the dying animal, tears streaming freely down his face now. "We'll take care of your baby," he promised. "Rest now. You did it. Your baby is safe." As if understanding, the mother bear's eyes slowly closed. Her massive body shuddered once, twice, and then grew still. In that moment, as the great creature's spirit departed, something extraordinary happened. Lily broke free from Emma's grasp and toddled to the bear's head. Before either parent could stop her, she placed her tiny hand on the bear's snout and whispered, "Sleep, Mama Bear. Sleep." The sound of approaching vehicles broke the sacred silence that had fallen over the yard. Dr. Reyes arrived first, jumping from her truck with medical supplies in hand. She stopped short at the tableau before her, a family gathered around a fallen bear, a blanket-wrapped cub cradled in Emma's arms, and a toddler with her hand resting on the dead mother's head. "What happened here?" Dr. Reyes asked softly, approaching with caution. "Something miraculous," Emma replied, unable to find more adequate words. Dr. Reyes quickly examined the cub, her experienced hands gentle but thorough. "He's dehydrated and malnourished, but he should survive with proper care," she announced. The mother, she moved to examine the larger bear, but it was immediately clear that no intervention would help. "She's been wounded for at least a week. Probably a poacher's trap or bullet. It's amazing she survived this long." "She was keeping her baby alive," Daniel said, "and she brought him here." "But why us? Why our cabin?" Dr. Reyes looked thoughtful as she administered fluids to the weakened cub. "Bears have extraordinary memory and intelligence. Is it possible she had an encounter with you before? Something positive?" Emma and Daniel exchanged puzzled glances. Then Emma gasped. "Last spring, Daniel, remember when we found that bear caught in that old fence on the North Trail? The one we helped free?" Daniel's eyes widened. "You think this is the same bear?" "That was miles from here." Dr. Reyes nodded. "Bears can remember faces and locations for years. If you helped her once, she might have remembered. When she was dying and needed to save her cub, she came to the only human she knew had shown kindness." Emma finished, fresh tears springing to her eyes. As they spoke, 2 ranger vehicles pulled into the yard. The rangers approached cautiously, surprised at the scene before them. After a brief explanation, they began the somber work of preparing to remove the mother bear's body. "What will happen to the cub?" Daniel asked, watching as Dr. Reyes continued to treat the small creature. "Normally, he'd go to a wildlife rehabilitation center," one of the rangers explained. "But this little guy is very young. He'll need specialized care." Lily, who had been watching everything with wide, solemn eyes, suddenly spoke up. "Baby, stay," she said firmly. "Baby, stay here." The adults exchanged glances, uncertain how to explain to a toddler why a wild bear cub couldn't simply become a house pet, but Dr. Reyes looked thoughtful. "Actually," she said slowly, "there's a new wildlife rehabilitation program starting up just 10 miles from here. They're looking for local properties to serve as monitored release sites, places where rehabilitated animals can be gradually reintroduced to the wild under supervision." Emma and Daniel looked at each other, a new possibility dawning. "You mean the cub would go to the rehabilitation center first?" Dr. Reyes explained, "But when he's ready for the gradual release process in a few months, your property could be ideal. You'd have professional guidance, and the cub would be tracked and monitored. He could grow up in the same territory his mother knew, where she felt safe enough to bring him when she needed help." As the adults discussed logistics, Lily sat beside the blanket-wrapped cub, gently stroking his fur the way she did with her stuffed animals. The cub, exhausted and weak, had fallen asleep under her tender ministrations. "Baby, not cry," she whispered to the sleeping cub. "Lily, help. Lily's mama and dada help." Hours later, after the rangers had reverently removed the mother bear's body and Dr. Reyes had taken the cub to the wildlife center for emergency care, the Harper family sat quietly in their living room. The events of the evening had left them shaken, transformed in ways they couldn't yet fully comprehend. "I keep thinking about her," Emma said softly. "How she remembered us, how she trusted us with what mattered most to her." Daniel nodded, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "And I keep thinking about Lily. How she knew, somehow. How she wasn't afraid." They looked at their daughter, now sleeping peacefully in her small bed, clutching her favorite teddy bear. Something profound had awakened in her today, a connection to the natural world that went beyond words, beyond the boundaries adults so often constructed between themselves and wild things. The following weeks brought many changes to the Harper family. True to their word, they began the process to have their property certified as a wildlife rehabilitation release site. Their cabin, once simply a retreat from city life, was becoming something more, a place of healing, a sanctuary. The day after the mother bear's passing, the Harpers visited Hope at the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. The small facility sat nestled among towering pines, a series of naturalistic enclosures connected to a modest main building. Dr. Reyes met them at the entrance, her face brightening when she saw Lily. "Our little bear whisperer," she said warmly. "Hope has been asking for you." "Bears can't talk," Lily replied matter-of-factly, but her eyes shone with excitement. Dr. Reyes laughed. "Not with words, perhaps. But in their own way, they communicate quite clearly." She led them to a special viewing area where they could observe Hope without him seeing them, an important precaution to prevent him from becoming too habituated to humans. The cub lay curled in a nest of blankets under a heat lamp, his tiny body rising and falling with each breath. He was severely dehydrated, Dr. Reyes explained in a hushed voice. "We've been giving him fluids and a special formula. The next 72 hours will be critical." Emma noticed how thin the cub looked, how vulnerable. "Will he survive?" she asked, voicing the question that had been weighing on all their minds. Dr. Reyes's expression grew serious. "Bears are remarkably resilient, but he's been through a tremendous ordeal. His mother kept him alive at the cost of her own strength. If he has even half her determination." She left the sentence unfinished, but her meaning was clear. Lily pressed her small hands against the observation window. "Hope," she whispered. "You have to live. Your mama wanted you to live." As if hearing her, the cub stirred in his sleep, one paw twitching. Daniel placed his hand on Lily's shoulder, and the family stood together, watching over the orphan bear that had so unexpectedly become part of their lives. The Harpers visited Hope every day that week. Each morning, Lily would wake asking, "Is Hope still alive?" Each time, they could give her the answer she wanted to hear. Slowly, the cub gained strength. By the 5th day, he was taking formula eagerly and exploring his small enclosure with wobbly steps. By the end of the 2nd week, Dr. Reyes declared him out of the woods, a phrase that made Daniel smile despite the seriousness of the situation. During this time, something else was happening. Word of the extraordinary events at the Harper cabin had spread through their small community. What had begun as local curiosity soon attracted wider attention. A journalist from the regional newspaper came to interview them, and their story of a dying mother bear who sought out human help for her cub captured hearts far beyond their remote mountain town. Letters and emails poured in. Some shared similar stories of animal intelligence and trust. Others offered donations to support Hope's care and the fledgling wildlife rehabilitation program. A wildlife documentary filmmaker contacted them, asking permission to tell Hope's story. "I never expected this," Emma confided to Daniel one evening after tucking Lily into bed. "I thought we were just helping one bear cub." Daniel nodded, sorting through the day's mail, more cards and letters, many with children's drawings of bears. "It's becoming something bigger. People need stories like this, reminders that there's still connection possible between humans and wild creatures." Speaking of connections, Emma said, Dr. Reyes called. She thinks Hope is ready for his first visit to what will eventually become his release territory. 3 weeks after the mother bear's death, that visit became a reality. Dr. Reyes brought Hope, now officially named through a community-wide vote that Lily had insisted on participating in, to the Harper property. The transformation in the small bear was remarkable. No longer desperately thin, his fur now glossy and his eyes bright with curiosity, Hope explored the edge of the forest under the watchful eyes of his caretakers. The rehabilitation team had constructed a special portable enclosure that allowed Hope to experience the sights, sounds, and smells of what would become his permanent home while still remaining safely contained. This soft-release approach would continue for months, gradually increasing his familiarity with the territory while minimizing human contact. Lily watched from the safety of the porch, squealing with delight when Hope stood on his hind legs to investigate a butterfly. "Hope! Hope!" she called, having quickly adopted the bear's official name as if she'd been using it all along. "She'll never forget this," Emma remarked to Daniel as they watched their daughter's face glow with joy. "Even if she's too young to remember the specific details when she's older, this connection will stay with her." Daniel nodded, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "It'll stay with all of us." That evening, after Hope had been transported back to the rehabilitation center, the Harpers sat down to dinner. Their meal was interrupted by a knock at the door. Daniel opened it to find Mrs. Abernathy, their nearest neighbor, though near was relative in these mountains, her cabin being 3 miles away. "I hope I'm not intruding," the elderly woman said, a covered dish in her hands. "I heard about what happened with the bear and her cub. My late husband was a forest ranger for 40 years. He always said animals know more than we give them credit for." Before long, Mrs. Abernathy was seated at their table, sharing stories of her husband's wildlife encounters over homemade blackberry cobbler. It was the first of many such visits. In the weeks that followed, other neighbors appeared at their door, some bearing food, others offering help with preparing the property for its new role as a wildlife rehabilitation site, all of them drawn by the story of Hope and his mother's last act of trust. The documentary filmmaker, a quiet woman named Sophia Chen, arrived in late autumn to begin chronicling Hope's journey. Her presence became a regular part of their lives as she captured Hope's progress and interviewed local wildlife experts about bear behavior and intelligence. "What your family experienced was extraordinary but not unprecedented," explained Dr. Harrison, the region's senior wildlife biologist, during one filmed interview on the Harper's porch. "There are documented cases of injured or ill wild animals seeking human assistance. What makes this case remarkable is the mother bear's apparent memory of a previous positive interaction and her deliberate choice to bring her cub to you when she could no longer care for him. Like she knew we would help," Emma said softly. Dr. Harrison nodded. "Animals, particularly intelligent ones like bears, create cognitive maps not just of their physical territory but of their experiences within it. Your family represented safety in her mental landscape." These conversations deepened the Harpers' understanding of the responsibility they had inherited. They weren't just helping one bear cub, they were becoming stewards of something larger, a model for how humans and wildlife might coexist with greater understanding. As summer turned to fall and fall to winter, Hope continued to grow and thrive. The rehabilitation team developed a careful schedule of visits to the Harper property, gradually increasing the duration while decreasing the level of human interaction. Dr. Reyes explained the delicate balance they needed to maintain. "We want Hope to recognize this territory as home, but we don't want him seeking out human contact when he's released," she told the family during one of the cub's visits. "It's a challenging line to walk." The first winter presented a particular challenge. In the wild, Hope would have denied with his mother, learning the rhythms of hibernation through her example. Without that guidance, the rehabilitation team had to create conditions that would trigger his natural instincts. "Bears don't truly hibernate," Dr. Harrison explained during one of his visits. "They enter a state called torpor, reduced heart rate and metabolic activity, but they can still wake if disturbed. It's crucial for Hope to develop these patterns now." The rehabilitation center constructed a special denning area at the edge of the Harper property, far enough from the house to minimize human disturbance but close enough to monitor. Hope, now triple the size he'd been when rescued, took to it instinctively, much to everyone's relief. Throughout that first winter, the Harpers rarely saw Hope. The rehabilitation team used remote cameras to monitor him, sharing updates with the family. Lily, now approaching 2.5 years old, would study the grainy footage with intense concentration. "Hope sleeping," she would announce. "Like Mama Bear taught him." Emma found herself moved by her daughter's persistent connection to both bears, the one they had saved and the one they had lost. Lily had begun creating drawings of Mama Bear watching Hope from the stars, a concept Emma had shared to help explain death in terms a toddler might understand. That winter brought changes for the Harpers as well. Inspired by Hope's story, Daniel enrolled in online wildlife management courses. Emma, who had previously worked remotely as a graphic designer, began collaborating with the Wildlife Rehabilitation Center on educational materials. Their cabin, once a private retreat, became a hub for local conservation efforts. When spring arrived, Hope emerged from his den healthy and noticeably larger. The rehabilitation team was delighted with his progress. "He's developing exactly as he should," Dr. Reyes said, her eyes bright with hope of her own. Dr. Reyes announced after his post-winter examination, his natural instincts are strong, and he's showing appropriate wariness around humans now. This last observation carried a touch of bittersweetness for the Harpers, particularly Lily. Hope no longer approached the edge of his enclosure when they were present. Instead, he watched them from a distance, his behavior increasingly like that of a wild bear. "He's forgetting us," Lily said sadly after one visit. "No, sweetheart," Daniel replied, kneeling beside her. "He's remembering who he truly is." That's exactly what his mother wanted. Local landowners, inspired by the Harpers' experience, volunteered their properties as potential wildlife corridors. Schools implemented conservation curriculums, and community workshops taught residents how to minimize negative wildlife interactions while supporting healthy ecosystems. Through it all, the Harper family maintained their special connection to the bear they had raised and released. Though they respected the necessary distance, they felt Hope's presence in the forest around them, a living reminder that compassion could bridge even the divide between species. One crisp autumn evening, as golden light filtered through the changing leaves, Daniel found Lily sitting on the porch steps, staring thoughtfully into the forest. "What are you thinking about, sweetheart?" he asked, settling beside her. "I was wondering if Hope's cubs have names," she replied. Daniel smiled. "What names would you give them?" Lily considered this seriously. "Trust and promise," she decided after a moment. "Because Hope's mama trusted us with her promise." Daniel felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Those are perfect names." Later that night, as Emma tucked Lily into bed, the little girl asked a question that revealed just how deeply she had internalized the story that had shaped her young life. "Mama, do you think someday trust and promise will bring their babies to show us too?" Emma smoothed her daughter's hair, considering her answer carefully. "I don't know, sweetheart. They're wild bears, and they need to live wild lives. But I do think some connections stay with us, even when we can't see each other anymore." Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. "Like Hope's mama watching over her from the stars." "Exactly like that," Emma whispered. As years continued to pass, the Harper family witnessed extraordinary changes in their community and beyond. Their story, first documented in Sophia's film, then in books and educational programs, inspired a new approach to wildlife conservation, one that recognized the delicate balance between helping animals in crisis and preserving their essential wildness. Daniel's guided nature walks evolved into immersive educational experiences that brought visitors from across the country. Emma's illustrations became the foundation for an award-winning children's book series that taught ecological principles through the story of Hope and her family. The Nature Center expanded into a respected research facility where scientists studied the complex dynamics of human-wildlife interactions. And Lily grew, carrying within her the indelible imprint of that first encounter with a desperate mother bear, and the orphaned cub she had entrusted to human care. Throughout elementary school and into her teenage years, Lily maintained her passion for wildlife, volunteering at the rehabilitation center and eventually interning with Dr. Reyes during summer break. On quiet evenings, the family would sometimes sit together on their porch, listening to the sounds of the forest, their forest, Hope's forest, a place where a desperate mother's love had created a legacy none of them would ever forget. "Do you think she knew?" Emma asked softly one such evening, voicing a question that had lingered in her thoughts for years. "Hope's mother, do you think she somehow knew that by bringing her cub to us, all of this would happen?" Daniel considered the question, remembering the intelligence in the dying bear's eyes. the deliberate way she had chosen their home as her final destination. He thought about Hope returning years later with cubs of her own, about the thousands of lives touched by their story, about the protected wilderness corridors now stretching for miles in every direction from their home. "I think," he said slowly, "that she hoped. And sometimes, hope is enough to create miracles." From the edge of the darkened forest came a soft huffing sound, a bear's contented sigh. Whether it was hope or merely the wind moving through the pines, it didn't matter. The message was the same: life continues, love endures, and sometimes the greatest acts of trust create ripples that transform entire worlds. Lily, now nearly grown herself but still carrying the wonder of that first encounter in her heart, whispered the words that had become a sort of prayer in their household. "Thank you, Mama Bear." And somewhere in the rustling leaves and gentle night breeze, it almost seemed as though the forest whispered back. 15 years later, the parking area at the Harper Wildlife Sanctuary was nearly full, a common occurrence on weekends, especially during the spectacular autumn colors of mid-October. A steady stream of visitors made their way along the winding path toward the main educational center, a beautiful timber frame building that had once been a simple family cabin. Inside, a special exhibition was opening, 2 Decades of Hope, a legacy of conservation, commemorating the 20th anniversary of the extraordinary event that had transformed not just one family's life, but an entire region's approach to wildlife. Dr. Lily Harper, now 22 and recently graduated with her doctorate in veterinary medicine specializing in wildlife rehabilitation, stood near the entrance, greeting visitors and answering questions. Her eyes, still carrying the same wonder they had when she was a toddler, lit up as she spotted a familiar figure approaching through the crowd. "Dr. Reyes," she called out, embracing the older woman warmly. Though now in her 70s, Dr. Elena Reyes remained active in an advisory capacity at the Regional Wildlife Center. She had once directed, "My dear Lily," Dr. Reyes replied, stepping back to look at her former protégé with obvious pride. "Or should I say Dr. Harper now? Your parents must be bursting with pride." "Speaking of my parents," Lily said with a smile, "they're waiting for us in the special collections room. There's something they want to show you before the official opening." They made their way through the exhibition hall, past dramatic photographs of black bears in their natural habitat, interactive displays explaining forest ecology, and a timeline documenting the sanctuary's growth from a single-family story to a nationally recognized conservation center. At the center of it all stood a life-sized bronze sculpture of a mother bear with her cub, a memorial commissioned for the 10th anniversary, created by a renowned wildlife artist. In a quiet room beyond the main exhibition space, Emma and Daniel waited. Though now in their 50s, they retained the same warmth and passion that had defined them 20 years earlier. Emma's illustration career had blossomed into a series of acclaimed nature books, while Daniel had become a leading voice in community-based conservation, developing programs that helped communities throughout North America find balanced approaches to coexisting with wildlife. "Elena," Emma exclaimed, embracing Dr. Reyes. "Thank you for coming. We have something extraordinary to share with you." Daniel gestured toward a large topographical map mounted on the wall, overlaid with colored tracking data. "This is the cumulative territorial range of what we now believe to be 3 generations of Hope's family." Dr. Reyes stepped closer, studying the data with professional interest. "Remarkable consistency in the core territory," she observed. "And you've confirmed the genetic lineage?" Daniel nodded. "The university research team has been collecting hair samples for DNA analysis. We've identified 11 bears directly descended from Hope, including 4 cubs born this past spring. 11 bears, Dr. Reyes repeated softly. All because one dying mother trusted humans with her cub. She turned to Lily. And how many people have been influenced by their story? Thousands, tens of thousands, Lily smiled. The visitor center just welcomed its millionth guest last month. And that doesn't count the schools using our curriculum or the people who've watched the documentaries or read the books. The ripple effect, Emma said, using the phrase that had become something of a motto for their work. Dr. Reyes nodded thoughtfully. And the original property where Hope was released, it's now the core of a protected corridor extending nearly 30 miles, isn't it? Connecting 3 national forests? Daniel confirmed. Creating safe passage not just for bears, but wolves, mountain lions, elk, species that were once nearly eliminated from this region. Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A young staff member entered, slightly breathless with excitement. Dr. Harper, Lily, you asked to be notified immediately if there was any activity at the North Ridge camera. Lily straightened, suddenly alert. Yes, what have you seen? It's the female we've been tracking, the one we believe is Hope's granddaughter. She's been captured on the Ridge camera with 2 cubs. A ripple of excitement passed through the small group. The North Ridge was significant. It overlooked the original Harper cabin site, now preserved as a historic marker within the larger sanctuary. Are they moving along the ridge, or? Lily asked. The staff member's eyes shone with excitement. That's just it, Dr. Harper, they're not passing through. According to the timestamp, they've been there for nearly an hour. Just sitting, almost as if they're watching the old cabin site. The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. 3 generations later, Hope's descendants still maintained some inexplicable connection to the place where their ancestral line had nearly ended, and then been saved by an extraordinary moment of trust between species. Would you like to see the footage? The staff member asked. They nodded, and minutes later gathered around a monitor displaying the crisp image from the remote camera. There, unmistakable in the clarity of the high-definition video, sat a healthy adult female black bear with 2 cubs beside her. Unlike most bears, which would typically be foraging actively at this time of year to build fat reserves for the coming winter, this family group was simply resting, gazing out over the valley where the original Harper cabin had stood. It's October 18th, Emma whispered, tears filling her eyes. Exactly 20 years to the day since Hope's mother came to our door. Dr. Reyes, the scientist who had once been cautious about attributing too much meaning to animal behavior, placed her hand on Emma's shoulder. Sometimes, she said softly, the evidence speaks for itself. As they watched, the mother bear rose and gently nudged her cubs. The small family moved unhurriedly along the ridge and disappeared into the forest that had become their protected kingdom, wild and free, yet forever connected to the humans who had once changed the course of their family's destiny. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the sanctuary, the Harper family, Emma, Daniel, and Lily, stood together on the observation deck overlooking the valley. Behind them, the education center hummed with activity as visitors explored the anniversary exhibition. Before them stretched thousands of acres of protected wilderness, a living legacy born from a single act of desperation and trust. She had once directed, "My dear Lily," Dr. Reyes replied, stepping back to look at her former protege with obvious pride. Or should I say Dr. Harper now? Your parents must be bursting with pride. Speaking of my parents, Lily said with a smile, they're waiting for us in the special collections room. There's something they want to show you before the official opening. They made their way through the exhibition hall, past dramatic photographs of black bears in their natural habitat, interactive displays explaining forest ecology, and a timeline documenting the sanctuary's growth from a single-family story to a nationally recognized conservation center. At the center of it all stood a life-sized bronze sculpture of a mother bear with her cub, a memorial commissioned for the 10th anniversary, created by a renowned wildlife artist. In a quiet room beyond the main exhibition space, Emma and Daniel waited. Though now in their 50s, they retained the same warmth and passion that had defined them 20 years earlier. Emma's illustration career had blossomed into a series of acclaimed nature books, while Daniel had become a leading voice in community-based conservation, developing programs that helped communities throughout North America find balanced approaches to coexisting with wildlife. "Elena," Emma exclaimed, embracing Dr. Reyes. "Thank you for coming. We have something extraordinary to share with you." Daniel gestured toward a large topographical map mounted on the wall, overlaid with colored tracking data. "This is the cumulative territorial range of what we now believe to be 3 generations of Hope's family." Dr. Reyes stepped closer, studying the data with professional interest. "Remarkable consistency in the core territory," she observed. "And you've confirmed the genetic lineage?" Daniel nodded. "The university research team has been collecting hair samples for DNA analysis. We've identified 11 bears directly descended from Hope, including 4 cubs born this past spring." 11 bears, Dr. Reyes repeated softly. "All because one dying mother trusted humans with her cub." She turned to Lily. "And how many people have been influenced by their story?" "Thousands, tens of thousands," Lily smiled. "The visitor center just welcomed its millionth guest last month. And that doesn't count the schools using our curriculum or the people who've watched the documentaries or read the books." "The ripple effect," Emma said, using the phrase that had become something of a motto for their work. Dr. Reyes nodded thoughtfully. "And the original property where Hope was released, it's now the core of a protected corridor extending nearly 30 miles, isn't it? Connecting 3 national forests?" Daniel confirmed. "Creating safe passage not just for bears, but wolves, mountain lions, elk, species that were once nearly eliminated from this region." Their conversation was interrupted by a soft knock at the door. A young staff member entered, slightly breathless with excitement. "Dr. Harper, Lily, you asked to be notified immediately if there was any activity at the North Ridge camera." Lily straightened, suddenly alert. "Yes, what have you seen?" "It's the female we've been tracking, the one we believe is Hope's granddaughter. She's been captured on the Ridge camera with 2 cubs." A ripple of excitement passed through the small group. The North Ridge was significant. It overlooked the original Harper cabin site, now preserved as a historic marker within the larger sanctuary. "Are they moving along the ridge, or?" Lily asked. The staff member's eyes shone with excitement. "That's just it, Dr. Harper, they're not passing through. According to the timestamp, they've been there for nearly an hour. Just sitting, almost as if they're watching the old cabin site." The room fell silent as the implications settled over them. 3 generations later, Hope's descendants still maintained some inexplicable connection to the place where their ancestral line had nearly ended, and then been saved by an extraordinary moment of trust between species. "Would you like to see the footage?" the staff member asked. They nodded, and minutes later gathered around a monitor displaying the crisp image from the remote camera. There, unmistakable in the clarity of the high-definition video, sat a healthy adult female black bear with 2 cubs beside her. Unlike most bears, which would typically be foraging actively at this time of year to build fat reserves for the coming winter, this family group was simply resting, gazing out over the valley where the original Harper cabin had stood. "It's October 18th, Emma whispered, tears filling her eyes. "Exactly 20 years to the day since Hope's mother came to our door." Dr. Reyes, the scientist who had once been cautious about attributing too much meaning to animal behavior, placed her hand on Emma's shoulder. "Sometimes," she said softly, "the evidence speaks for itself." As they watched, the mother bear rose and gently nudged her cubs. The small family moved unhurriedly along the ridge and disappeared into the forest that had become their protected kingdom, wild and free, yet forever connected to the humans who had once changed the course of their family's destiny. Later that evening, as twilight settled over the sanctuary, the Harper family, Emma, Daniel, and Lily, stood together on the observation deck overlooking the valley. Behind them, the education center hummed with activity as visitors explored the anniversary exhibition. Before them stretched thousands of acres of protected wilderness, a living legacy born from a single act of desperation and trust. "Do you ever wonder," Lily asked, "what would have happened if we hadn't been home that night? If Hope's mother had chosen another cabin, or if you'd been away in town?" Emma shook her head. "I don't think it was random. Something guided her to us. Specifically, the bear we'd helped before," Daniel suggested, referencing the theory they developed years ago about the bear caught in the fence. "Maybe," Emma replied. "Or maybe something more, something we still don't fully understand about how deeply connected all living things truly are." As darkness fell, they remained on the deck, sharing memories and dreams for the sanctuary's future. The air grew cool, stars appeared overhead, and somewhere in the vast protected wilderness before them, Hope's descendants prepared for another night in their ancestral forests, wild and free, yet bound by an invisible thread of memory to the humans who had once saved their bloodline from extinction. When they finally turned to leave, Lily paused for a moment, looking back toward the darkened forest. "Thank you," she whispered, to the mother bear who had died saving her cub, to Hope who had survived and thrived, to the generations of bears who had followed, and to the mysterious forces that had brought them all together in one desperate, beautiful moment of trust. From deep within the forest came the distant sound of a bear's huffing call, perhaps coincidence, perhaps acknowledgement. The Harper family smiled, understanding that some connections transcend time, species, and even death itself. The circle that had begun with a desperate mother's final journey would continue expanding outward, touching lives both human and wild for generations to come. In the quiet sanctuary of the forest beneath the watchful stars, life continued its ancient dance of struggle and survival, sacrifice and renewal. And in that continuing dance, one thing remained constant: the enduring power of trust to create miracles from moments of deepest desperation. The forest whispered, the stars watched, and the legacy of one mother bear's final act of hope continued to unfold in ways no one could have imagined on that fateful autumn evening 20 years before. As Hope's second summer approached, the rehabilitation team began the final phase of preparation for his release. They expanded his enclosure significantly, allowing him to forage and explore a larger territory while still within protective boundaries. They introduced challenges, food hidden in increasingly complex ways, simulated encounters with other wildlife sounds, all designed to sharpen the skills he would need for independent survival. The Harper's role evolved as well. Under the guidance of the wildlife experts, they learned to minimize their presence during Hope's visits, observing only from designated blinds or through remote cameras. It was difficult, especially for Lily, but they understood the necessity. Through spring and early summer, Hope continued to mature. His once playful explorations became more purposeful, his movements more confident. The rehabilitation team documented everything: his foraging success, his reaction to potential threats, his growing independence, all indicators of his readiness for full release. 6 months had passed since that fateful evening when a dying mother bear had brought her cub to their doorstep. Hope had grown from a malnourished, vulnerable cub into a healthy young bear preparing for life in the wild. Though the rehabilitation experts brought him to the Harper property with increasing frequency to familiarize him with his future territory, they were careful not to let him become too accustomed to humans. Despite these precautions, they couldn't entirely prevent the special bond that had formed between the young bear and the Harper family, especially Lily. The day of Hope's final release was set for late summer, a time when natural food sources would be abundant, giving him the best chance for a successful transition to independent life. In the weeks leading up to this milestone, Emma found herself experiencing unexpected emotions. "I never thought I'd feel this way about a wild bear," she confessed to Daniel one evening as they sat on their porch, watching fireflies rise from the meadow. "It's like sending a child off to college. I'm proud and terrified all at once." Daniel squeezed her hand. "I know. But remember what Dr. Harrison said: Hope has all the skills he needs. And he'll still be in these mountains, just living the life he was meant for." As the release date approached, the story of Hope and the Harper family reached an even wider audience. Sophia's documentary had been picked up by a national nature channel, and a children's book author had approached them about creating an illustrated story based on Hope's journey. The local elementary school had even developed a curriculum unit about black bears, using Hope's story as its centerpiece. "I never imagined our lives would change this way," Emma remarked to Mrs. Avery, who had become a regular visitor and something of a grandmother figure to Lily. "All because a bear chose our doorstep." The elderly woman nodded wisely. Life's biggest changes often come from unexpected directions. "My Harold always said nature has a way of finding the right people when they're needed." The evening before the release, the Harpers hosted a small gathering for those who had been most involved in Hope's journey: Dr. Reyes and her rehabilitation team, Dr. Harrison, Sophia the filmmaker, and a few neighbors who had contributed to preparing the release site. As the adults talked on the porch, Lily sat slightly apart, solemnly arranging and rearranging her collection of bear figurines. Daniel noticed his daughter's unusual quietness and sat beside her. "Are you thinking about tomorrow, sweetheart?" Lily nodded, her small fingers tracing the plastic bear's back. "Hope won't be in his special place anymore." "That's right. He'll be in the whole forest." "Will he be scared?" Daniel considered this question carefully. "Maybe a little at first. New things can be scary. But he's ready, and he'll remember everything he's learned." Lily looked up at her father, her eyes serious. "Will he remember us?" It was the question Daniel had been expecting, yet it still caught him unprepared. "I think," he said slowly, "that he'll remember feeling safe here. Just like his mother remembered." This seemed to satisfy Lily. She handed her father one of the bear figurines, the smallest one. "This is Hope when he was little," she explained. "We should keep it so we don't forget." Dawn broke clear and golden on release day. The Harper property buzzed with quiet activity as the rehabilitation team made final preparations. A small gathering had assembled, only those directly involved in Hope's care, as the team wanted to minimize stress and commotion. Sophia positioned cameras discreetly to document this culminating moment. At mid-morning, the transport vehicle arrived, containing Hope in a special crate. Through small viewing panels, the Harpers could see that the young bear was alert and active, showing healthy signs of stress, an important indicator that he had maintained his natural wariness. Dr. Reyes gathered everyone for final instructions. We'll be transporting Hope to the release site about 2 miles into the forest. It's been selected for its natural food sources, water access, and distance from human habitation. The tracking collar he's wearing will allow us to monitor his movements for the next 2 years without interfering in his life. She turned to address the Harpers directly. As we've discussed, this is a clean break. From this point forward, Hope needs to see all humans as something to avoid. That means no attempts to find or approach him, even from a distance. We understand, Daniel assured her, his arm around Emma's shoulders. Dr. Reyes's expression softened. I know this is difficult. You've been part of an extraordinary journey together. But remember, the greatest gift you can give Hope now is the freedom to be fully wild. The small procession made its way along the forest trail, rehabilitation team members carrying the crate on a special stretcher, followed by Dr. Harrison and the Harpers. Lily walked between her parents, unusually quiet but taking everything in with wide, solemn eyes. When they reached the selected clearing, the team carefully positioned the crate facing into the deeper forest. Dr. Reyes performed one final check of Hope's tracking collar, then stepped back and nodded to her colleagues. We're ready, she said quietly. On the day of Hope's final release, when he would remain permanently in the wild with only distant monitoring, everyone gathered in a semicircle several yards behind the crate. Hope, now a gangly adolescent bear, paced inside his transport box, eager for freedom. Remember, Dr. Reyes cautioned the family one last time, from now on, you need to maintain your distance. No feeding, no approaching. He needs to be fully wild to survive. They nodded their understanding, though tears glistened in Emma's eyes. Lily, now 2 years old and more verbal, stood solemnly between her parents. Hope, go home, she said with the simple wisdom of a child, like Mama Bear wanted. The crate was opened. Deep in the forest behind their property, Hope emerged cautiously, sniffing the air and taking in his surroundings. He looked back once at the humans who had saved him, his dark eyes seeming to hold a wisdom beyond his years. Then, with the graceful movement that was his birthright, he loped into the dense underbrush and disappeared among the trees. That night, as Emma tucked Lily into bed, the little girl asked a question that caught her mother by surprise. Mama Bear see Hope now? Emma paused, uncertain how to explain death and spiritual concepts to a 2-year-old, but looking into her daughter's earnest eyes, she found herself saying, yes, sweetheart. Mama Bear can see Hope. She knows he's safe, just like she wanted. Lily nodded, satisfied with this answer. She brought him to us, she said sleepily, because we help. That's right, Emma whispered, stroking her daughter's hair. She trusted us with something precious. As months turned into years, the Harper family often glimpsed Hope in the distance, a dark shape moving through the trees, growing larger and stronger each season. They maintained their distance as instructed, watching his progress through the tracking updates provided by the wildlife team. The days following Hope's release were strange for the Harper family. They had grown accustomed to the rhythm of visits from the rehabilitation team, the updates on Hope's progress, the careful preparations for his future. Now, though they received regular reports from Dr. Reyes based on Hope's tracking data, there was a palpable absence in their lives. "He's doing well," Dr. Reyes assured them during her first post-release visit. "He's staying within the expected territory range, finding food sources, and, importantly, avoiding human areas." For Lily, the transition was particularly challenging. Though still too young to fully comprehend the complexity of wild animal rehabilitation, she had formed a deep connection with Hope's story. Emma and Daniel found her often at the picture window, staring into the forest as if expecting to glimpse a familiar furry figure. To help their daughter process this change, they began a new family tradition. Each night before bed, they would add a new detail to Hope's great adventure, an ongoing story they created together about Hope's life in the forest. Sometimes they incorporated real details from the tracking data, other times, they imagined what he might be experiencing as the seasons changed. Today, Hope found a big blackberry patch. Daniel might begin. "And he ate until his whole mouth turned purple," Lily would add with delight. "Then he took a long nap under an old pine tree, listening to the wind in the branches," Emma would continue. These stories helped all of them maintain their connection to Hope while respecting the necessary distance his new life required. As months passed, the Harper property underwent its own transformation. Working with wildlife experts, they established a small nature center in an outbuilding, where local school groups could learn about black bears and conservation. Emma's educational material, featuring illustrations inspired by Hope's story, became popular resources for teachers throughout the region. Daniel, having completed his wildlife management certification, began leading guided nature walks, teaching visitors how to observe wildlife respectfully and safely. The documentary about Hope, released 18 months after her return to the wild, brought even more attention to their conservation efforts. Through it all, they received regular updates on Hope from the wildlife team. His tracking data showed a healthy young bear establishing his territory, finding seasonal food sources, and successfully navigating his first full year of independence. When his second winter approached, Dr. Harrison reported excitedly that Hope had created a proper den, a critical milestone demonstrating his fully developed natural instincts. "He's doing everything right," the biologist told them, exactly what his mother would have taught him had she survived. These words brought both comfort and a bittersweet pang of memory. None of them had forgotten the mother bear's desperate journey to their doorstep, her final act of trust that had changed all their lives. As time passed, the tracking reports became less frequent, quarterly, then biannually. This was by design. The goal had always been for Hope to live as a fully wild bear without human intervention. His collar was programmed to eventually detach, allowing him complete freedom. Lily continued to grow too, starting kindergarten and developing new interests, though bears remained a special fascination. On weekends, she would often join Daniel on his guided nature walks, solemnly informing visitors, "We have to be quiet and stay far away so we don't bother the animals in their homes." Her understanding of wildlife conservation developed beyond her years, shaped by her unique experience. When asked what she wanted to be when she grew up, her answer never varied: an animal doctor, like Dr. Reyes. 3 years after Hope's release, they received unexpected news. The wildlife monitoring team had captured images of a young adult male bear they believed to be Hope, based on his territory range and distinctive chest markings. Though his tracking collar had detached as planned the previous year, these photographs confirmed what they'd hoped. He was thriving in the wild. "He's right where he should be," Dr. Harrison told them, sharing the images. Healthy weight, good coat condition, every indication of a successful rehabilitation. Life continued its forward march. The Harper conservation work expanded, their nature center grew, and Lily started elementary school. The story of Hope and his mother became something of a local legend, shared around campfires and in classrooms, a testament to the deep connections possible between humans and wildlife when approached with respect and compassion. When Lily turned 6, something extraordinary happened. The family was having a picnic in their backyard to celebrate her birthday when Emma suddenly froze, her hand gripping Daniel's arm. There, at the forest's edge, approximately 50 yards away, stood a magnificent adult black bear. The animal's posture was alert but not aggressive, watching them with what appeared to be deliberate interest. "Is that?" Emma whispered, hardly daring to hope. Daniel studied the bear through his binoculars, noting the distinctive white chest marking. "I think it might be," he replied, his voice barely audible. "It's the right age, right territory." They remained perfectly still, unwilling to disturb this rare moment. Then something even more astonishing occurred. From the underbrush behind the adult bear, 2 small cubs emerged, tumbling playfully in the grass. "Look!" Lily gasped, keeping her voice low as she'd been taught. "Hope has babies." The family stood transfixed as they watched Hope, now confirmed to be female, patiently shepherding her cubs at the forest's edge. Before disappearing into the trees, she paused, looking directly at the family as if making sure they had noticed her gift, the continuation of life, the fulfillment of her mother's dying wish. "She came to show us," Emma whispered, tears streaming freely down her face. She remembered, even after all this time. In that moment, they all understood the profound nature of Hope's visit. This wasn't a coincidence or a random bear passing through. The timing, on Lily's birthday, in their backyard, held too much significance. Hope had deliberately brought her cubs to the humans who had once saved her life, completing a circle that had begun with her own mother's desperate journey years before. Daniel wrapped his arm around Emma, both of them too moved for words. Lily stood transfixed, her young face alight with understanding beyond her years. After several minutes, Hope gently nudged her cubs, guiding them back into the protective cover of the forest. Just before disappearing completely, she turned once more, her gaze meeting Lily's across the distance that separated their worlds. "The circle is complete," Daniel finally whispered. That evening, they called Dr. Reyes and Dr. Harrison to share the extraordinary encounter. Both scientists were amazed, though cautiously restrained in their interpretations. Bears do have exceptional spatial memory and can recognize specific locations, and possibly even individuals, across many years, Dr. Harrison explained. But to interpret this as deliberate communication. Dr. Reyes, however, seemed less skeptical. "After what I witnessed with Hope's mother, very little would surprise me. Some animals possess depths of awareness we've barely begun to understand." The news of Hope's cubs spread quickly through their community, adding a new chapter to what had already become a cherished local story. The Nature Center hosted a special exhibition titled Full Circle, The Journey of Hope, featuring photographs documenting her rehabilitation and release, alongside images of her mother and new information about black bear family structures. As the months passed, Hope and her cubs were occasionally spotted in the forest surrounding the Harper property, always at a distance, always wild, yet somehow continuing to share territory with the humans who had once saved her. The wildlife tracking team confirmed through careful observation that Hope had raised exceptionally healthy cubs, demonstrating excellent maternal instincts. "She's a remarkable mother," Dr. Harrison said, his voice filled with admiration. Dr. Harrison told them during one of his visits, "She's teaching her cubs everything they need to survive, just as her own mother would have taught her." "She learned it somewhere," Emma replied softly, even without her mother to show her. For Lily's 6th birthday, the family established the Mother Bear Wildlife Trust, a foundation dedicated to supporting wildlife rehabilitation and promoting coexistence between humans and large predators. The foundation's logo, designed by Emma, featured a mother bear walking with her cub beneath a starlit sky, a tribute to both bears who had changed their lives. With the Trust's support, the rehabilitation program expanded, creating a network of monitored release sites throughout the region.